everybody. We're starting early, which is a first for me at Comic-Con this weekend, but also a first for me as a Jewish person. I think this is the first Jewish panel I ever start early ever in the lifetime of Jewish panels. So thank you all for making it possible being here like super early. I hope you all got the seats you wanted, and if you didn't, there are a couple more down the front, there are a couple in the back. If you feel like they're too close now, like I might call on you. So, hi everybody. You are in Starring Jewish Women, a representation conversation. If this is where you're supposed to be, thank you for being here. It's really just lovely to see such a full room. So, as we're getting started, I wanted to just start, and we all wanted to start, I'm the representative of all of us, by giving a shout out to Comic-Con, because clearly from what we've seen on the schedule, it was a priority to showcase underrepresented voices and give visibility to creators and fans who are finally able to see themselves in the culture that they consume. So I know that there were a couple of panels, some of you probably went to them. There's Gay Geeks and Where to Find Them, Neurodiversity and Fandom, India's Superheroes, Face Equality, other kinds of inclusion. I couldn't attend Pop Culture in the Christian Church, which is happening now, or Salam Fandom, which is earlier in the con, but I did go to the Mary Sue panel, where women panelists, including people of color, talked about when they had first seen pop culture figures that reflected their own families and experiences. And this is the common denominator, right? It's seeing ourselves. And in some cases, this means people who physically look like us, or people who don't physically look like us, but who act in ways or motivated by behaviors that are familiar to us. But who are the us when we're talking about Jewish representation? Because Jewish people live all over the world. Our stories, our family situations, our levels of observance, and our food, culture, traditions are also all over the map. There are Jews of all points of observance, points of origin, approaches to community, levels of education, financial stability levels, all colors and backgrounds, and we're going to get into some, possibly all, but let's be cautiously optimistic. We're going to get into some of this. We want it to be a robust conversation among us. We've done a couple of preliminary meetups, and there's so much we want to say. But I wanted to take this one moment to just remind you that we're not here to solve anti-Semitism or fix any big problems that Jews are having in the world. But representation is an important part of creating empathy and understanding who we are and what our values are. So, like, I've seen a ton of Spider-Gwens everywhere. Has everybody seen Spider-Gwens? So I've seen women just loving to be part of the Spider-Man universe. I've heard Asian women talk about how meaningful Rose Tico from the Star Wars series was important to them, how meaningful, important she was. And if we increase and improve representation, we can increase and improve the way people understand what Jewish is, and I think that we're all here for greater empathy in the world. I think we all need it. So, thank you. Okay, so we're going to begin with our esteemed panel after those words from me. I will ask them to introduce themselves, so you get to hear their voices starting immediately, and they'll feel that they're represented in this conversation. But before I do that, I wanted to say I'm Esther Kustanowitz. Welcome. We were supposed to start at 10:30. We started a little early, which was great, but I forgot to introduce myself. So I'm Esther Kustanowitz. I'm a writer based in LA, and I run a podcast called The BAGEL Report, which is where Jewish identity meets popular culture. So if any of you are interested in that, see me after. I have a sticker for you. Okay. So esteemed panelists. Hi there. Hold on a second. I'll let you speak. But please introduce yourselves, and we're going to jump right into the first question, so we're going to be so efficient with our time. Okay, so please introduce yourself, panelists, dear wonderful panelists, and tell us, in brief, how being a Jewish woman has affected your career trajectory. In other words, what's your industry origin story, right? And where does it intersect with your Jewish identity?
I can go now.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Michal Schick. I am what I like to think of as a professional Jewish nerd. I'm a writer on the Netflix animated series The Dragon Prince. Season 6 is out now, including an episode I was very, very pleased to co-write with Aaron E. Haas and Justin Richmond. It's called The Red Wedding. Everything's fine. My writing has also been featured in New Myths magazine and Joseph Gordon-Levitt's Tiny Books of Tiny Stories and the forthcoming anthology Jewish Futures 2. As for how my identity has impacted my career path, as an Orthodox Jew, it's kind of, you can't untangle the two. Every opportunity that I have, every opportunity that I've missed has been tied into kind of the religious rhythms of my life. And it's something that, is a challenging balance, but also something that has proven to be very, very rewarding. I feel really lucky to be able to kind of say that, you can be X and also do this at the same time.
Beautiful.
Oh, and I should say that Michal is the reason we're all sitting here today because she gathered us together. So I just want to thank Michal.
Nick Fury.
Yeah, if we're the Avengers, well, we'll get to that later. Okay.
I'm Jenn Levine. I'm a writer, producer, and story consultant. I have about 25 years experience in the entertainment industry, working on every angle from the studio side to the agency side. I'm now consulting on a show for Amazon and for production companies freelance. I have produced podcasts for all ages, fiction stories for audio, and it's a pleasure now at this point in my career to start to be weaving together my Jewish identity with that of my Hollywood identity, and working right now on a show that is about the story of King David and giving it some Jewish flavor and perspective, which is very exciting. And I've been a fan. My fandoms are Star and Wars, and it's a pleasure to be back at Comic-Con. This is the first time I've been back in 24 years. And it's wonderful to be here with you all. Thank you for being here.
Hi, I'm Sandra Leviton. I'm a producer and a writer. My origin stories start very, very young. I've done everything pretty much in television, starting from cable access to unscripted TV. So if you've watched it on Dr. Phil, HGTV, America's Most Wanted, all that fun stuff, I probably worked on it at some point. From there I was in the agency world, much like Jen, working with writers and directors, which tying into the panel was really the first place where I started to wonder and question about representation. I think the sole Reformed Jew on the panel, so my experience has definitely been a little bit different than my fellow panelists in terms of analyzing our own presence here and representation in general. But really it was the agency world where I started to see and question, where am I, where do I fit into all of this? And even though, Jews quote run Hollywood, the question is we really don't. And particularly as Jewish women, we don't see ourselves quite the same way. And so when I started working with TV writers and TV directors, is really where I was starting to wake up from that and open my eyes to what was going on. And from there, I was what I call a network suit at FX Networks. I was there for 5 years. I worked in what they call development and current programming, which means I helped oversee every show we had on the air. I was there from the final season of The Shield all the way up to the pilot of The Americans. So any episode that you watched on air during that 5-year period, I had my hands on. So very proud of that. That's where my journey continued to grow and see as I got to really be on the inside of everything. And I'm sure if you've been to other TV panels at this point, I'm sure you've heard some of the cautious optimism and doom and gloom that we're experiencing at the moment. We were going through that period when I decided to leave the network as well, and left and became an independent producer and writer. I'm mostly a genre girl, so for action, sci-fi, nerd stuff, that's my world. And most recently, you would have seen a movie that I produced called Student Body, which is currently on Showtime and Paramount Plus. It stars Christian Camargo, who is the ice truck killer in Dexter, so if you're familiar with that. He was a wonderful part of my movie, as well as Harley Quinn Smith, which is Kevin Smith's daughter, and an amazing, amazing young cast. And in between all of that, I've also produced other films called Zone 2, which you can find on Shudder. And in terms of my Jewish representation, really with all of that, when I left the network, one of the big things I wanted to do was help bring underrepresented voices to the screen and tell those stories. And I've been fortunate to do that, and I've been able to mentor a lot of people in this process. But what I realized is that while I was busy helping everybody else, I wasn't seeing myself represented. And so that really brings me to where I am today, where a lot of the content that I now write and produce always has some kind of aspect of Jewish representation in it, as well as inclusivity from other communities.
Thank you. She just told me that thing about how she worked at FX and touched all of those amazing shows right before the panel. I'm like, wow. Okay. So, one of the things that we see here at Comic-Con, and in true blazing rainbow colors, is that fandom is a community. And whatever your fandom is, you can find other people who are part of that world with you. And so I wanted to talk about the role that community plays in your Jewish fandom world. And I want to start with Michal, because I know she's got a really good answer for it.
Yeah, I think community is essential. I don't think that's a controversial statement here. To that end, I started a group called Orthodox Ladies United in Fandom in 2015, and we have 4,000 Jewish women discussing everything, ideally more fandom focused than not, but some memes get in there. It's really been, it's been an incredible experience to realize that you don't have to apologize in any context or at least in that context, for either part of your identity. If you're in, an Orthodox or observant space, you do not have to be like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm a nerd, I'm into all this weird stuff. And if you're in a general nerd space, you don't have to be like, yeah, I'm this weird religious person. You can just kind of exist as both with other people who are experiencing the same thing.
And that's how we met.
Yeah.
Okay, does anybody else have a comment you want to share about the role of community in your work?
I mean, honestly, for my stuff, and I don't know about Jen and your experience, particularly on the TV side, we are a very, very small community, not just as an industry, but as Jewish people in the industry. Yeah. In some way, we always find that we're connected, either through our own, work experience, or honestly through familial connections. We are a very small group of people, and we all seem to find each other, and particularly when we're in the genre spaces, we grab onto each other and don't let go at that point, because we have to support each other and love each other. And I think you guys know too, as being in these genre spaces, that community is so important and so loving.
Jen?
Just to say, I think it was not so long after Olaf was created that several people at the same time said to me, why are you not in this group? You're observant, you love and obsess over fandom topics. These are your people. And I found great friendships from it. I found writing groups out of it. It's a very special thing. So fandom communities, whatever your community may be, that becomes family. It's really a special thing. And in Hollywood as well, we've been able to find groups of people through affinity that are, have now since come together in the past few months, that are also a very special way to connect and relate and inspire each other, which is wonderful.
Thank you. I think, one of the things that we think about when we're talking about this, it's starring Jewish women, right? Well, we're kind of the Jewish women. I know maybe some of you were hoping we were going to uncover some lost comic book where there's a whole league of super Jewish women, which Could happen, right? We could
Who
write
knows?
that. If anybody wants to write that, like, be in touch with us after. But what does successful Jewish representation look like in the pop culture that we consume, and how is it particularly for women?
For me, I struggle to find something that I'm really happy with, which doesn't mean that there aren't examples that other people aren't happy with. I've found the most success in the novel space. Naomi Novik's Spinning Silver I was terrified to read that book because I was like, I knew that the character was an Orthodox Jewish young woman of marriageable age in, Lithuania who, falls in love with, or sorry, spoiler, but whatever, has a magical adventure. And I was like, this could be one of my favorite books, so the stakes are real high. Fortunately, Naomi Novik is a genius, so it's incredible, and it is one of my favorite books. Leigh Bardugo's The Familiar also deserves a shout out. But yeah, I feel like there's some space on the page, I think, that has not necessarily come forth into the either animated or live action, or in my opinion, comic space yet.
If you have an empty seat next to you, if you could just raise your hand, because I think we've got a couple of people who need these seats. Oh, look at that. Okay, great. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Jen?
Just to take the torch on that topic, I also have seen much more exciting representation in my mind in the book and comic book space. The Hereville books, How Mirka Got Her Sword, were so lovely and heartwarming and touching, and still really awesome fantasy adventures. So I thought that was wonderful. And outside of that, the most represented I ever felt watching film and TV was actually watching Bo-Katan, and seeing how in the last season of The Mandalorian, she was a character who the armorer dubbed as someone who walks in both worlds, and is someone who is fluent in the religious community within Judaism and also works alongside not just secular Jews, but non-Jews all the time in my work. I felt very seen by here's this character who's balancing her religious community with everything else she has to do to be a leader in the world, and that was very special to me.
Yeah, I think that The Mandalorian in particular is a very important Jewish text.
Yeah.
So we could do a whole panel about that next year. But
if you want more on that, look up the Mandalorthodox panel that Jen and I did, and Esther also did an incredible podcast episode on the Bagel Report, like really diving into it.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
I was actually just about to plug that for you, so thank you so much. We're all kind of moderating this panel, and that's okay. I wouldn't expect anything less.
I'm an oldest, I can't help it.
All hands on deck.
Sandra, what's going on?
Oh man, so I think for myself I have more of a general answer of what would I like to see in terms of, representation, and what does good representation look like to me. And I think it's really just being able to be a full, rounded individual. I want to be able to have Jewish heroes and Jewish villains. I want us to have complex characters who it's just part of their lives. It's just who they are. It doesn't have to necessarily always make up every little bit. We don't always have to be, Holocaust survivors or fighters or victims. We are so much more than that. So for me personally, being able to see, better Jewish and particularly women representation is that we're just well-rounded characters who can be anybody. In terms of ones that, I've personally connected with over the last few years, The Girls in Broad City was probably one of the first times I've seen myself and my friends represented on screen, where I was able to actually look at them and say, oh my God, I feel like I know these people. And that was probably one of the first true times I've been able to see that. And particularly in like the horror genre, we're starting to see a little bit more of an emergence of Jewish horror, which is amazing. But in terms of women being represented in the genre, it's still severely lacking. There's only about 2, maybe 3 films, horror films that center on Jewish women. And so I'm trying to work to have more of that and see more of that, and not just saying, hey, this is particularly a Jewish horror story and we have our version of, The Nun or Omen or whatever. Like, No, just something that's like, hey, here's a character who's a Jewish woman, that's just who she is, but she's part of this story, and hopefully a final girl.
Right. So I think that one of the things that we're talking about when we're talking about Jewish representation of women is stereotyping. And if you layer that on to the general stereotyping about women in horror, we're mostly possessed, demonic, succubus, like all of those things. And, you know, maybe you and I are going to do a Supernatural panel next year, because I started tracking all the Jewish moments in Supernatural, but like in Supernatural, like it's always the men saving the day and the women either being victims or demons. And that kind of binary isn't good for anybody. And speaking about, like, you know, the binary of stereotypes, you know, I've been speaking in about women, but we should also say in terms of non-binary characters, like they also deserve to have their spaces as well. And you know, I haven't seen a lot of that integrated into Jewish content, but I am sure it is coming. You know, when we're talking about the stereotyping issue, you know, everybody knows the broad strokes of a stereotype and what that looks like. And I think that one of the things that creators do when they want to indicate somebody is Jewish, they have like these visual tells that they create. You know, if they want to say a man is Jewish, they put on a kippah, a yarmulke, a skull cap, or they dress him up in a black hat and long side curls, and we're supposed to know from that visual shorthand that he's Jewish. With women, it's a little bit different, and it tends to focus more on our behaviors, I think. And you can agree or disagree with that, but you know, the overbearing Jewish mother, the jappy Jewish woman, you know, it's an old acronym that no one uses anymore, except I will say Rachel Bloom in Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, if any of you are fans of that show. Yeah, exactly. God, I wanted her to be on this panel so badly. But she has a whole song called the Jap Battle Rap, which is amazingly layered. It's exceedingly specifically Jewish, with a lot of dropped references in it that are really insidery. And, you know, she is proudly Jewish as a performer. The character that she played on her own show was very proudly Jewish. So all of that is part of the burgeoning scene that you were talking about with Abby and Alana in Broad City. I think that the new generation is really possessing the entirety of their identity in a way that my generation, I'm Gen X, hi, that we didn't know how to do. Like we had to sometimes code switch. You know, there were a lot of people in my generation and previously who changed their names. You might know, you know, the Phantom Menace and the Phantom Menace star Natalie Hirschlag. You guys know who she is? Yeah, figure it out. I know this is the right crowd for that. But yeah, so I mean, I think that we're trying to own the parts of ourselves that in previous generations maybe people were a little nervous about owning. Does that resonate with any of you?
Yeah, for me, I think something that is important specifically with, you know, my good friend Natalie's example, I'm using her first name, but she is a kind of a sex symbol, right? You know, she's the desirable, beautiful, you know, queen, warrior, senator, etc. And she's not, you know, I'm not saying Padme had to be identifiable as Jewish, but Natalie Portman, in her Natalie Portman guise at the time, was not like the image of a Jewish woman. You know, the image of a Jewish woman is like, I mean, in the worst case, Howard Wolowitz's unseen screaming mother on The Big Bang Theory, you know. And, you know, the idea that you can have, I don't know, even non-curly hair, you know, is like, what? Yeah, right? Like, I think... Yeah. Yeah, but there's just that basic idea that kind of Jewish women are kind of this thing that Jewish men want to get away from, I think, as opposed to being attractive in our own right, is one facet on this D20 of, you know, problems.
Is that a Lord of the Rings reference?
It's a Dungeons and Dragons.
Come on, what are we even doing?
I just want to make sure everybody's still awake.
Roll for clarity.
Yeah, okay. And I know that there's also been an increase in Orthodox portrayals, and that has been done more or less successfully across different properties, and I'm wondering, Jen, if you'd like to speak to that.
Sure. You know, anytime there is a mezuzah on screen, my family, my friends, we all freak out because we feel seen. We feel like there's that representation right there for us. It's something that's coming in dribs and drabs. A lot of it has been these portrayals of people leaving Orthodoxy and not so much the stories of people coming towards it. I wasn't always Orthodox. I grew up in a secular conservative household and sort of became more religious in my 20s. And so for me, that representation is totally lacking, again, except for Bo-Katan. So that's something that I definitely want to see more of, is what are the journeys of people who are coming. Let's see the convert stories. Let's see the stories of Sephardic Jews, that we rarely get to see those. There's, you know, where are the neurodiverse and differently abled, and where are those stories? So for me,
But not just anxious, like actually neurodiverse.
yeah, I mean, you could be anxious and
Right. We don't want to make sure all Jewish characters are never anxious again, because that would be a responsible representation.
exactly. We wouldn't be being true to ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, I think also to add on to that too, you know, I think it's important to, you know, point out that like most Jewish people don't look like us, and I want to be able to see more of their stories. You know, Jews come in all colors, and all nationalities. And I think it's important that we do see more of that, because we do get very stereotyped as, you know, looking and acting in certain ways. You know, the one thing that I will say also too is why I love, you know, like the horror and, you know, fantasy and sci-fi genre so much is that we can be a little bit more experimental with it. We are seeing a bit more in terms of representation in these spaces. A number of films have come out recently where we do have you know, more religious communities embracing like the LGBT community. You know, there may be other problematic things within some of those films, but it's nice to see that there are people out there and filmmakers out there who are taking some of those chances, and we are able to see some of that.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that we're longing for so desperately is nuance and greater context for the characters that we see. And you know, there's a lot of using like somebody like a rabbi or the term bat mitzvah or bar mitzvah or a bris, circumcision, as like shorthand for somebody's Jewish and as a joke. I don't know that circumcision is a joke, and I don't know what we're going to get into today. But you know, the idea that those are the public tropes of Jewishness, you know, and not any of the more meaningful and more internal reasons that people are Jewish and behave Jewishly. And you know, you know, this is not necessarily the most popular fandom at Comic-Con, but I'm willing to bet that there are some of you who watched The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. Oh, look. All right. Amazon, call me. We'll do it now next year. On Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, like those portrayals are specific to a certain time, place, economic level, you know, social standing, etc. And they are mostly secular. They do go to synagogue on occasions. They enjoy having the rabbi over to break the fast at Yom Kippur, but they also enjoy buying their meat at a non-kosher butcher. And that's fine for that portrayal. And they also have a character who has converted to Judaism, and she does everything. She wants to do everything. There was even an episode during one of the seasons where they talked about a very obscure Jewish holiday called Tisha B'Av. If some of you know what that is, it's a day of mourning. It's coming up next week, 2 weeks, something like that. It's a day of mourning and fasting in memory of the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. Yes, we hold a grudge. No, we remember our pain is really what I wanted to say. And so that character shows a lot of the eagerness of some Jews by choice who really convert because they want to be part of it. They want to do everything. They want to go to every panel in the Comic-Con of Judaism, just to put it in a framework everybody understands. And her family makes fun of her, and they treat her derisively. And, you know, her enthusiasm should be infectious, and it's not. But that's because they're used to living their lives the way they are. And I think that one of the things that we're looking for, again, like we said, is like the value of nuance and authenticity. And what do we need to do in order to get that nuance and authenticity in portrayals of Jews in general and Jewish women specifically? Anyone?
I mean, I think I've touched upon this already, which is just, you know, like, I'll tell a story that everyone knows, you know, I think at this point, particularly in some of the action movies, but, you know, I'll use Alien as the best example, right? Like, and, you know, she's not Jewish, but she's a woman, and we all know that the role of Ripley was originally written to be a man, and eventually was changed to be a woman. They didn't change anything except for her gender, and she has become one of our most iconic heroines, you know, in the genre spaces. And, you know, I like to look at our ability to do that in a very similar way. Like, just write us as people, just portray us as people, well-rounded individuals. You know, it shouldn't matter necessarily in terms of like, you know, hey, like screaming like, oh, this is Jewish, this is a woman, this is that. Avoiding those stereotypes, like let's, you know, take those tropes and flip them on their heads. And, you know, I think that's probably the best way we can tackle that.
I think that's very good. And to say also, just like with any underrepresented voice or any voice that's different than the voice of the writer, hire a consultant. Have somebody who knows that world and that framework and that role better than you, give you some advice on how things should look, or hire writers from that community. There's no better way to get insight into it than to have somebody on your team who knows inside baseball.
Yeah, and to me, I think the specificity is really important. I look to a show like Shogun on FX that was obviously not Jewish at all, but had an incredibly detailed cultural sensitivity that you felt, even if you didn't understand what, you know, the angle of someone's obeisance meant or where they were sitting on the floor or whatever, you knew that it had meaning because it felt like the character knew why they were doing it. A lot of the time in Jewish representation, it does feel a little bit desultory or kind of broad. This is not a knock on the show because I haven't watched it, but I saw a scene from the Patient or something with Steve Carell,
yes.
where there's, you know, two Orthodox boys in the scene, and like their kippas are their skull caps are velvet, and they are like popping off their heads, and they're the right kind of clothing, but boys that age would not have fresh ones. They would be ratty, they would be like flat, you know, and that's the kind of detail that it doesn't make the show bad or the scene bad or representation bad, but it's the sort of attention to detail that I think is lacking in not just Jewish representation, representation of most marginalized communities.
And The Patient, I think, brings up some interesting things for me. Just one of the things we talked about on my podcast was the fact that The Patient was had a lot of Jewish specificity to it, like you were saying, and that's a branch of the family that's featured, where the mother was a Reform cantor in a synagogue, and her portrayal, I think, is very accurate. And then their son became a religious Jew and then wouldn't eat in their house because they weren't kosher enough. So there's a lot of conflict around different types of different observances of Judaism clashing. And, you know, they can make accommodations for those things. Like, it doesn't have to be a point of conflict. But, you know, drama thrives on conflict. So to an extent, there has to be a journey of oh, this person is different than me. Oh, now I have to compromise my lifestyle, but I really love them, so let's build a bridge. And I think that's an important part of it that's not always there, the let's build a bridge of it. Often there's a reticence on one side or another. And again, builds good drama, but isn't necessarily, something we model.
Well, I think it's worth pointing out that Judaism is often used as a point of conflict in these stories for characters. Either it's something that they are rejecting, or it is something that is causing tension within like the familial group or the friend group. And I'm kind of tired of it. Like, Jews are kind of just like, we religious or we don't religious the way we do, and like we mostly get along. It's I'm not going to say we're chill, but we're way more chill than I think a lot of these representations present.
Have any of you seen any good representations of Jewish women lately? And I actually going to open it up to everybody. It's like, anybody shout out? Somebody want to shout out?
I'll go with, one, and I'm going to come back to the horror genre, so I keep talking about this, I hope some of you are horror fans. But if you have watched recently on Hulu, there's a film called Clock. I love, it's a great movie. I actually really loved it, and it spoke to me on a lot of levels. Is it the best movie? No, but I think it had a really wonderful sense of Jewish representation in horror and spoke to a very universal theme. It poses the question of, a young woman, she's had career success, and is getting pressure from everybody, to have kids, because what are we expected to do? We're expected to have kids, and we have the extra generational trauma of, Holocaust and, pogroms and things throughout the years that, it's a big thing, like when you get married. But that's also a very universal theme, like whose parents aren't asking them, when they have kids, right? And so this is a deeply personal battle for her, but it's a horror movie. So it's not a question about whether or not, is she Jewish? She's actually asking the question of, do I want to have kids? What lengths should I go through this? And it's a really great horror movie. And so while it has that, it's a very universal film that I think everyone can relate to, but they just happen to be a Jewish family. And so I think that was probably one of the better ones that I've personally seen lately. So I'll let everybody else know.
There's nothing that comes to mind for me other than what I've already mentioned, unfortunately.
Right. I mean, So, we got one there.
Yeah.
I didn't really because it was the actor.
We Were the Lucky Ones on Hulu?
Really, that was really not. And the way he was project cheaper.
Yeah,
I'm
those
sorry, I
stories.
couldn't hear you.
I think she was referencing We Were the Lucky Ones on Hulu.
Yeah.
Those stories are super important, and this is a difficult thing to say, but there's a lot of stuff about Jews who either didn't survive or barely survived, and to me, I think not that Holocaust stories aren't important, but that they aren't necessarily speaking to what people experience today, as far as I don't know, just living as a Jewish person with agency, and in the modern world.
Well, again, I'm going to put my Gen X hat on again and say that, in my generation, a lot of our grandparents were Holocaust survivors. It really informed every decision that they made. It informed their parenting approach. It informed where we went to school. It informed who our friends were. And I think that that's being diminished as we get further from the Holocaust. And that's one of the reasons that I think that series like We Are the Lucky Ones, which I think was extremely well done, and had at least two Jewish leads and more Israeli actors as well. Jews playing Jews is something that doesn't always have to happen, but it would be nice if it happened sometimes. I've spoken to a number of Jewish women actresses who have been told their whole lives that they look too ethnic to play a main role in a television show, or in a film, and then it's a Jewish story, and they bring in Felicity Jones to play Ruth Bader Ginsburg, right? Jones, that's right. That's her last name. Okay. We know her in this room. People probably know her as Jin Urso, right? Okay. So
So does that make Jin Urso by the transitive property Jewish.
Right.
Where
right,
are we?
exactly? because the person who played her played Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Right. This is the math that we do when we're talking about Jewish representation. Is that if we don't find it, we'll look for it. So yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot to be said about all of that. And when I mentioned Maisel before, that's another example that has been very publicly discussed about the fact that Rachel Brosnahan is not Jewish and she's playing this very Jewish character, and the question of if you're putting on a New York accent and playing a Jewish character, are you playing Jew face, which is not a term I like, and I can't believe I just brought that into the panel. I'm so sorry. But if any of you listen to Sarah Silverman's podcast, she's got a great series of episodes that she talks about Jew face and why and what it is and what it isn't, and the fact that what she's really looking for, and I think what I'm looking for, and I think what the panelists are looking for, is that sometimes Jewish characters who are admirable could be played by Jewish actors who have been told for years they can't play non-Jewish roles, so now they can't play Jewish roles? Like, what is that about? Are they allowed to play any roles? They have to be the person who, like, comes in from the side and makes some sort of joke and then runs away? Like, that's sidekick model.
I would also add, too, on the flip side of that, a lot of our prominent Jewish actresses tend to veer away from Jewish roles because they know that they will be pigeonholed in that. And it's, kind of heartbreaking that they don't have the freedom of choice in the same way that other actresses might, because, I always say, like, assimilation is a hell of a drug, and, it's one of the biggest protections some of us have had, being able to assimilate into culture, being able to assimilate, into a crowd because of the color of our skin, and a lot of, Jewish women don't have that. And the fact is that a lot of Jewish actresses don't have those choices to play other roles because they will get pigeonholed into always playing the Holocaust survivor, always playing, the, overbearing Jewish mom, and they don't want to do that. And so there's two sides of that coin of, for our actors out there.
I think also for me, it's hard to come up with an example just because there is very little in the space that I'm specifically interested in. There is Jewish representation in comics. I don't read a ton of comics, though. I'm a Marvel Cinematic Universe person, and so far the representation there has been horrible. There was, we were supposed to intuit that Kate Bishop's aunt was Jewish because there was a little menorah in the entire Christmas-themed show in her, in her kitchen or something, which is not where you keep the menorah, by the way.
We had a party when we saw it. I mean, it was like...
Yeah, but it's so, they did the same thing in the Daredevil show. Like, there was it's the holidays. Here's a Jewish family lighting the menorah. And it's not that those things aren't important. It's just that we've seen them so many times, and they if they're not backed up by anything, then they're paper thin, And I'm tired of that. I want a Jewish character in the MCU who is cool with being Jewish, who isn't Mark Spector, who is weirdly traumatized for bizarre reasons, at least in the show, and then is
and that's Moon Knight, in case people
yes,
don't know.
They're just erased altogether, Was it Scarlet Witch? And correct me if I'm wrong, you guys probably will know it better than I, but, she originally, at least coded, was, a Jewish character. And, they've made it very clearly, in the films that, she was actually a Christian character. If you look in the rooms, in the bedrooms, you can see that there's crosses hanging. And so there's subtle ways that they do have a tendency to eliminate background, whether it's overt or coded.
Yeah, that's great. I think, okay, so let's talk about what we say tachlis, and it's very purposefully. It's a Yiddish word, in case anybody didn't know that. Okay, so how can we improve the state of Jewish women's portrayals in the future?
hire Jewish women.
Hire Jewish women. Did you hear that? Okay.
We're writers, we're actors, we're producers, we're directors, we're composers, we're right here. One of the reasons this conversation is complicated is because you certainly can't say that there aren't Jewish actresses in Hollywood, but that doesn't mean that, prominence or presence in one area, and which comes with caveats, as Sandra was saying, kind of makes up for the rest of it. If you aren't doing the work behind the scenes, then I don't think you're doing the work.
And I would say along with that, make room for the unconventional. Make room for those voices that are different, that are not the mainstream. We've all seen Janice from Friends, we've all seen The Nanny. That's not what we need more of. We need more of the voices of, the stories that have not been told yet. That's what I think we should be looking for, and I think that's going to make a huge difference overall in representation. Let's see more Jewish joy.
No, you guys said you were going to win, and it's not bad.
Yeah, I think that that Jewish with a context as opposed to Jewish for the jokes is one of the things that I'm looking for. There's a famous episode of Seinfeld in which Tim Watley converts to Judaism, and Jerry's convinced he did it so that he can tell Jewish jokes with impunity. And so he converted to Judaism for the jokes. And I feel like in some ways the content that we're offered in terms of Jewish portrayals tends to be very Jewish for the jokes heavy. And it tends to engage in that kind of a visual shorthand of what a Jew looks like. But the truth is Jews don't look the same, never have, and are increasingly looking more like everybody. So it's not just somebody with brown hair or a white person is a Jew. It's like there's a lot of identity politics that we'll definitely get into at some future point. But I want to say also that there's one of the important pieces of context for the role for why there weren't more Jewish stories and more Jewish actors playing Jewish roles back at the beginning of Hollywood was because there were a lot of studio heads and writers, directors, etc., who were Jewish by birth and wanted to keep that kind of on the down low. They were afraid, especially in the 1940s, when you might know there was something rather major going on against the Jews in Eastern Europe. They were very nervous to be out and proud Jews, and so they tended to diminish their own Jewish identities and be afraid of Jewish stories. And I think that what we're seeing now, like we said before, with the millennials, Gen Y, and whatever comes next. Or we go back to the beginning?
I think we're alpha.
Z,
yeah, we're on
Z,
alpha.
and then alpha, right. So who knows by the time we get to delta or epsilon what will happen. But I think that we are definitely moving into a space where Jewish creators can be themselves a little bit more. I'm thinking about creators like Amy Sherman Palladino, who did first Gilmore Girls, not Jewish much, except there's a weird scene with a chuppah, like a Jewish wedding canopy in there, for no apparent reason, and everybody talks about how it's there for no apparent reason, but okay. And then she did Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, extremely Jewish. Jenji Kohan did a whole lot of things, including Weeds, and then Orange is the New Black, and there was a very Jewish storyline in Orange is the New Black, but there were Jewish characters in Weeds also, but the things she did at the beginning of her career were not Jewish, and so they kind of build their reputations first and then say, okay, people know me, people like me, I'm going to get Jewy. But that is not, in this newish generation of content, everybody has the different parts that make them who they are, and that could be a gender identity, it could be it could be like a question of where they grew up, or what their ethnic background is, and all of that can come together and be part of the content that we create. And so I think we're closing up now. I wanted to thank you all for being here, but I think one of the things that we need to talk about is again hiring women, hiring people who are non-binary to tell non-binary stories. And whatever the specificity of the world that you're building as a showrunner, creative, or anything, you need to ask the people whose stories those are to be participants, and not just rubber stamp something at the end, but to really review it and give them a chance to give input into the content that they're creating so that it is nuanced and that it is full and and a multiply complected kind of story. So I think that we're now at 11:15, which means that we're about to end on time too, which is a crazy thing. They're going to kick us out of Judaism because we started early and ended on time.
Listen, German Jews are on time. Okay?
Right,
So
that's true.
None of us are
Thank
German
you all for being here. If you have any questions, you can come up to us afterwards. And thank you. Follow everybody. And since people are still seated, I want to ask you each to just tell us where people can follow you.
I am posting updates only to my Twitter due to a former Twitter addiction. Totally over it. That's Ink as Rain, INKASRAIN, and you can also find me at the same handle on Instagram for absolutely nothing interesting.
Not always true. I'm at Jennifer Sarah Leviton.
And I thankfully left Twitter many years ago. So I'm only on Instagram now at SJ Leviton. And thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you very much.
And I'm on Twitter as Esther K, posting less and less there for obvious reasons, but on Instagram, Esther Kustanowitz, but you can always find me at The Bagel Report, also TBR The Pod on Instagram, The Bagel Report on Twitter, and on Twitter also TV Gone Jewy, which you can ask me about if you like. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. And really, thank you all for being here. If you want a Bagel Report sticker or tattoo, I've got a couple of them up here. So that's it. Thanks.
I just want to say thank you to Yusuf and the security team who were extremely amenable to working with us and really, helped make this panel possible. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.